this is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B plus undervolt.
Roger, main B undervolt. Okay, stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
Nice. I have Andrea here with me. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
We do the Talking Pools podcast on Fridays. Every Friday, we have a couple of podcasts that go on during the week, but we are the hosts of the Friday show. Andrea is a pool service tech in South Florida, and I've done a little of this, a little of that, pretty much everything but build a pool in my 31 years now, 31 years this year in the pool industry, and started my career in Bel Air in Houston. Worked in the Bunker Hill area, down in Sugar Land, and lived in just off South Derry Ashford for a while over in A-Leaf. So not too far from a lot of you guys. So when Kristen reached out and asked if we could speak about mustard algae, was specifically what she was asking about. She said that we've had some problems in that area this year. I thought it was only right that we speak about not mustard algae in general, but your mustard algae. What do you think about that?
Wait, their mustard algae?
Yes, their mustard algae.
It's different from mine?
Well, because it's Houston, it's not Florida. I put some stuff together looking at mustard algae. Like I said, I didn't really want to do something in general because that doesn't really help a lot. I wanted to look at problems specific to that area. So in doing that, and I don't know how many of you all have followed our podcast before or different things that we have put out, but one of the things that we try to adhere to is first and foremost that the pool professional is the person who should be making the decisions on how to treat the pool side, because what you have is a doctor-patient relationship with that pool. And every pool is different. So we like to also encourage folks to think outside of the pool. So take more into consideration than just the water, and also to share that we realize that we recognize that there's no such thing as a cookie cutter method that works everywhere, because every pool is not the same, every yard is not the same, every environment is not the same. Where do you think the best place to start would be?
The source water.
I wanted to look at your source water, and I wanted to see if there were things that we could identify there that could be contributing factors to what you guys are experiencing out there in the field, out there in your pools. I pulled up your most recent water report for the Houston area. I think there's 8 different public works that service that area. And I went through each of these, looking at different factors that I knew could contribute to mustard algae or potentially be a problem there. One of the things that we look at is where the majority of the water comes from. And it looks like it comes from the San Jacinto River, which unfortunately does get a lot of runoff from a lot of the different farm areas. I know you guys also have a phosphate mine, your nitrate levels, your calcium hardness level, and then total organic carbon, which was something that came up on this initial one. It's not in any of the other water reports. We treat the water. There are a lot of times where we deal with the hand that we get, and your nitrate levels overall don't look bad. Your calcium hardness levels don't look bad either. And I'll show you how this all ties in as we go a little bit deeper into it after we get through these. The total organic carbon level here, I'm going to point out just now that it's a little bit on the high side, and we'll come back to that. And that's all the dissolved organic carbon in the body of water. This is tested from tap water, well water. They say it's an unregulated contaminant. I will tell you that the EPA's recommended level is a maximum of 2 parts per million. These are in parts per billion. So obviously that's 6.7 parts per million is what your average is, with 18.8 parts per million as a high.
Part of their total dissolved solid.
It does play a role. It is one of those factors that we need to look at least when we're trying to identify why we might be having higher than normal mustard algae problems. Here's another report here. Calcium hardness here, we're at 117 parts per million is the average. That's good. The nitrate level is 0.8 at a high, 0.2 at a low. That's really good. We didn't see that. Total organic carbon doesn't come and get up again in any of these other reports, but I did want to go through and look at each one of these to show you what we have. So if you know who's supplying you with your water, then you can identify those numbers from these sheets. One of the things that I like to do, because I do get phone calls.
No, I think it's just the connection.
I think Kristen hung up on us.
No,
Was
they're still
something
here.
that you said. Okay.
It wasn't
So
me.
I'm pretty sure. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Stop trying to
Identify
blame it on
your,
me.
one of the things we should always do is look at our fill water, because again, that's where things start with. Anybody who's out there treating their pools knows that this water chemistry in the filled water can change on a regular basis. So that's also something we might want to keep up with, because it can help us head off problems that could arise. Here we only have a calcium hardness reading, and that's dating back to 2020. These are the most recent ones that they have published. When we look at mustard algae, it's important to understand where it comes from, what it is. Mustard algae is a diatom. That's the family that it fits into. It's a very specific genus where there are thousands of different species, and those species vary greatly from pool to pool. So if you're fighting mustard algae in one pool, the next pool that you have a mustard algae problem in, it might not be the same type of mustard algae. It can look the same, it can act similar, but it could be something very, very different, which is why sometimes you'll see that a specific treatment will work in one pool, but not in the next. We did some extensive research on this with black algae, cyanobacteria, and what we found is that the constituents that make up black algae vary drastically, even within as short a distance as a mile. And the same does hold true for diatoms and also for green algae. So it's not always the same. There's no such thing as cookie cutter pools or cookie cutter methods of treating chemicals. You have to determine your protocol of care, and there's nobody who can say what's better for that pool than you. The amount of lead going into the water in Houston, that is going to contribute to mustard algae problems indirectly. The reason that Houston area had such a high amount of lead in the water, as it states here, even in '86, when lead plumbing was banned, contractors continued to install lead pipes. And then even beyond that, they started to use lead solder. So the lead was still there, which gave us a very high lead level in the waters, in the drinking water in Houston, to the point that it could have caused concern. When Flint, Michigan popped up, that got everybody's eyebrows raised. And okay, we need to take more drastic measures here to reduce the amount of lead we have in the water. And the best way to do that, short of yanking pipes out of the ground and putting new plumbing in, is to go with corrosion inhibitors. The two main types of inhibitors used are either orthophosphates or silicates. Both are a problem if you're looking at mustard algae as being a threat. Orthophosphates, we know that's algae food. And whether you believe in phosphates or not, they do feed algae, whether you believe it's a problem or not. Because when I was in that area, I'd never even heard of phosphate removers. I don't think anybody mentioned it for the first 10 years that I was in the industry. But if they're pumping this stuff into the plumbing, it likes to coat things, is how it works. So as it's flowing through in the water supply, it'll actually coat the inside of the lead pipe. Silicates will do the same. And that's how they're able to get safer drinking water to people's homes. But
so I have like 1,500 parts per billion coming out of my tap water in some places. So you just have to test it.
Yes, you should test it. The content coming out of the tap water is important, because if you're battling more than one problem, and well, I'll show you how it ties together. But silicates and orthophosphates, both things that mustard algae needs to survive. In fact, mustard algae, or diatoms, is the only thing known on the planet that actually consumes silicates. So by pumping silicates into the drinking water to seal the inside of a pipe, that means your filled water contains silicates.
Pool Perfect Max from Natural Chemistry is the premier weekly maintenance product for all pools. This 3-in-1 technology enhances clarity, maximizes pool program efficiency, and prevents problems. Take every pool care program to the max with Pool Perfect Max.
Is there a test kit for that?
I'm sure there is somewhere, but I don't know where it is. I've not seen one. But I do know that this is what they're doing to treat that. Orthophosphates, okay, we can test for phosphates. I get that. So this is a little bit different than the phosphates that you add when you add a sequestering agent. We know sequestering agents work because it is a phosphate product. Phosphates will help to keep metals and calcium sit in solution. At the phosphates that we get in stain preventatives, over time, chlorine will oxidize those and they will then become orthophosphates. So they oxidize them into orthophosphates, which algae then can use for food. But I'm not so much concerned with what's coming from the stain preventatives. Again, like I said, I'm looking at right now just what we're getting in the incoming water. So this would be added when you first fill the pool. This would be added every time we top off after evaporation. These levels are only going to grow.
Or if the pool is leaking. Ugh.
Or if the pool is leaking. But then I'm not so much worried about a level building because it's just kind of recycling, right? It's coming in, it's going out, it's coming in, it's going out. So orthophosphates contribution to mustard algae. It helps build cell energy, develop nucleic acids, and also for the growth machinery of the cell itself. So that's important. And the reason I'm pointing these things out individually is because some of these things we can control, some of them we cannot. So we talk about orthophosphate and we talk about silicates. I know how to reduce the phosphate level. I don't know, aside from draining and replacing water, how to reduce the silicate level. And if there's silicates in my fill water, I don't know that that's going to be a benefit. So the point is we can only control the things that we can control to help us battle this problem. We need silicates solely for the cell structure. We know diatomaceous earth is prehistoric mustard algae. It's diatoms, same stuff. It's the cell wall. It's not fossilized. What it is extremely well preserved exoskeleton. The exoskeleton of the diatom happens to be made of silica. They call it water glass. It actually protects the cell, but that's what's left over. This is what they mine. This is what they use for in your filters, in your diatomaceous earth filters to catch the debris. This is what they used to use to kill bugs. Diatoms need silicates in order to do this. It's an important part of their growth. They have to have it. Above and beyond having it as an additive in the water supply, your swimming pool is a source of silicates.
From the plaster?
From the plaster. If you have a DE filter, guess what? Your filter media is a source of silicates. The sand you use in sand filters, that's silica sand. Then, as you'd mentioned, there is silica in the plaster for the pool itself. So we already have that. But if we're adding it in the fill water, that level's even greater. So we're starting to set up an area by having these things already present in the water as an environment that's conducive to mustard algae growth. It's an inviting neighborhood that it can move into. But there are a couple of other factors as well. So this isn't one we can control, but phosphates is. And the research I did on black algae was kind of interesting because what I found is that there were many things that lived inside that little small black dot. The main constituent, the primary constituent, was cyanobacteria. There was no black algae. There's no such thing. So what happens is the cyanobacteria actually have these polysaccharidic secretions. It's almost like a slime layer. In that, other things take harbor. And there were other kinds of cyanobacteria in lesser quantities, but then there were also diatoms from time to time, mustard algae. But if you've ever killed black algae and ever had it so that it left a mark on the wall or almost like a scarring, it could be potentially that you have a pool that had black algae, that had diatoms in the black algae biofilm, that in a single location long enough could have been consuming the silicates in the pool wall.
Pitting, but like just from the black algae.
Nitrates, that's another problem. I did not see in any of the city water reports that nitrates were a high enough level that I would be concerned with, at least not coming out of the tap. We need nitrates for protein and biomass production, nucleotides, and also, again, growth machinery. But we don't have a good way to control nitrates. We don't have a good way to lower nitrates. Unless you believe those two idiots that were on Facebook with the Tito's, right? The vodka, that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to prove that you could use vodka to carbon dose water in order to promote bacteria that would then denitrify the water.
Well, I saw that video and they were also trying to claim that the vodka cleared up leaves.
I have a theory on what might work, but I don't think that's practical even. So nitrates were one of the problems that we also face in the water, but it's not a big issue in your area. And there's no practical way for us to attack that aside from draining and refilling. And again, if the source water is not any lower, then there's really no point in doing that either. Because it's an algae, it is photosynthetic. That means that it uses the sunlight to produce carbohydrates so it can feed itself. The problem is, and this is where we come back to that total organic carbon, is that when light is not available, mustard algae specifically can use total organic carbon to help supplement what it lost in being unable to produce or to perform photosynthesis. And that you have a super high level of in your water, fresh out the tap. So that is problematic. Now, I can tell you that the ability to perform photosynthesis for mustard algae is pH dependent. The lower the pH, the less able it is to perform photosynthesis. So if this is something that you're constantly battling, a pH of less than 7.4 is the place that you want to be.
Pool Magazine is the hottest new publication for the pool and spa industry, featuring up-to-the-minute news on what's happening in the pool world in a fresh new stylized format with our mobile-friendly app. Pool Magazine is the app for keeping your fingers on the pulse of the pool industry. You'll find featured news, editorials, podcasts, videos, and more on the Pool Magazine app. Download on Google Play and the App Store.
Aquastar's new pipeline cartridge filters, available in 2 sizes, deliver top-notch hydraulic efficiency along with best-in-class filtration performance, approaching that of DE filters. Uniquely designed open pleat spacing means 100% of the media square footage is usable, and these claims are backed by NSF test results. Designed with a pro's time and comfort in mind, the patented double locking system improves safety and ease of access, making filter cleanings faster than ever before. Available now. Ask your supplier for pipeline filters today.
Are they all frozen or wait? Oh, I hear it now. Okay.
Kristen, can you hear us okay? Sorry about that. I got kicked off the hotel's internet, but I am back. So again, a pH level of less than 7.4 will make your pools less prone to having mustard algae, which is great because that's not even something that you have to add to the water. You can just set your chemistry up so that the pool is less conducive to having this problem. And if we can prevent it just by doing the simple things, just make the water chemistry so that it's uninviting, then we should have less to battle. That is really the best first step in prevention. We're not doing anything wild or wicked to the water to make it so that it's dangerous or even harmful to the pool. We're just making it so that mustard algae doesn't like it. And again, like I had mentioned, if we're missing sunlight, it can use that total organic carbon to supplement what it's missing from photosynthesis. So that's where that number comes in handy. And again, well, not handy, but that's where it's important. There's nothing that we can do about it. So we have to look at some of these other things. So far out of all of this that we've spoken about, the things that mustard algae needs that's in your water that we can do something about, just orthophosphate so far and pH. Because the other things we don't have control over.
So you could keep a lower pH and then balance the LSI accordingly, the rest of it.
Correct. Because with a higher pH, That's more inviting to diatoms. That's a property of water that is more prone to seeing diatom growth. It would excel in a pH above 7.4. Here's the total organic carbon. Here's some of the numbers. The EPA recommended maximum, like I said, is 2 parts per million, or recommended level rather. Now, this is one of those things that they don't regulate. So the EPA doesn't have a drinking water standard that says, no, you can't go above this, but it does have this number of 2 part per million that they would like you to stay below. They call it a secondary contaminant. It's not something they regulate. They're more concerned with odor and taste. The max where they say, okay, wait a minute, that's too much, is 25 parts per million. Houston's max last year was 18.8 parts per million. Both of those numbers are pretty high. Diatom growth shows an increase at 6,000 parts per billion. Your average is 6,790 parts per billion. So you're right there at that range where this contributes to an increase in diatom growth. So this is a factor that we definitely need to keep in mind. Nothing we can do about it, but we need to know that it's there and know that your water is more prone to seeing mustard algae problems.
Oh, I was just going to ask about calcium. Sorry, I got excited.
This is something that we can do something about. Calcium level is important because it affects motility. Motility is the diatom's ability to move. The higher the calcium level, the easier it is for diatoms to move about the pool. And they can move. And if you look at them under a microscope, they are constantly moving. And the amount of calcium in the water plays a factor in how far they can go, how fast they can move, and how often they can move. The lower the calcium hardness level, they lose a lot of that ability to get around. And why do they move? They move so that they can get to areas where there are better resources, whether it's silicates, changes in pH, changes in water temperature, sunlight. Now, I know we've all had mustard algae that clings to the wall, but we've also all had mustard algae that dusts on the floor. And that, again, because there's a lot of different types, movement is super important. So this is another thing that we can control. So like Andrea said before, okay, so we can go with a lower pH and balance the saturation index with a lower pH. There's no reason we can't go with a lower calcium hardness level and balance the saturation index with a lower calcium and lower pH, because you can make up the difference in total alkalinity that you need to balance your water properly. And again, I'm not talking about right now the saturation index. We're not going to set it up. Obviously, the imbalance is imbalance. It doesn't matter where the numbers are as long as you're in balance, right? If you're looking at a commercial pool, they're going to care that your pH is between 7.2 and 7.8, not necessarily that it's in the ideal range. So we can do this. You can go with 200, which is the lower end of acceptable, or the lower end of the ideal range for calcium hardness, versus 400, which is the higher end. And of course, then we know that the acceptable range for calcium hardness in a pool is 150 to 1,000 parts per million. There's no reason we can't go with a lower number here and set it up so that the pool is not as appealing to mustard algae. These are just no-cost things that you can do to make it so that you should have less problems. It's not going to be a guarantee, not going to be the type of water that it really wants to live in. Circulation's another factor. Diatoms, mustard algae needs slow moving water. If you have dead spots in circulation in a pool, mustard algae will find them. They will grow in the areas. That's where they're going to collect, in those areas where the water is moving the slowest, whether it's in a radius in the bowl, in the deep end of the pool. It could be in the stairwells where it could start. It could actually even be in plaster, not embedded in plaster, because I've not found any algae that does that. But when a pool needs to be replastered, you know how the surface kind of gets all those nooks and crannies like an English muffin? Well, each one of those nooks and crannies creates a dead spot in circulation. So there could literally, in a pool with an older plaster job, be thousands of these. Small, but algae is microscopic. You don't see it till you have a ton of it. they could get a foothold in those small dead spots. And then once they get a foothold, it is a heck of a lot easier to colonize. Outside of that, if you're aware of dead spots or whether you knew you had any or not, we can shift those return jets around to try to compensate for that. Look at the areas where the mustard algae seems to be settling out. That's obviously a good area for it. We just talked about it. We know it can move if it needs to. So start setting your water up so that we're getting more flow in those areas. And hopefully that doesn't create another area that it can take over. We're just covering all of our bases. This is one of the other things that we can control. So we have orthophosphates, pH level, calcium hardness level, circulation. That's a big chunk of it. The only thing out of that group that I mentioned that requires a cost chemically would be phosphate removal, right? But even if you didn't want to mess with that, we still can just adjust the pH, the calcium hardness level down and increase circulation in areas where there is not enough. And I have no evidence of this. And trust me, I searched and I searched and I searched looking to see if diatoms have ever been found in Houston tap water, but it's not something that they monitor. So I don't have an answer for you. However, it's not unheard of for diatoms to make it through the public works process of treating water for drinking and be pumped out of the tap. This is factual. They can travel from quite some distance. And some time also. When diatoms don't have what they need in the specific area to survive, they go into a resting spore state, kind of like a little mustard algae coma. And they stay there, right? Like how Boba Fett took Han Solo around in that cryogenic thing. So they stay in that area until they are again in an inviting environment where they can come back. And they've had this happen with spores that have been over 100 years old. So it is possible that any place, anywhere in the country where there had been a pond that dried up and we've had a fire, you know how everybody from California is coming to Texas, right? And y'all want them to stay there? Well, so they're diatoms. That can get caught in the smoke from the fire and actually be transported great distances. It's not uncommon for it to happen in a fog, in an electrostatic mist. It's not uncommon for it to happen in smoke. And I have a couple of examples up there where they've actually managed to retrieve diatom resting spores that are known only to grow in a specific lake area in Africa in air samples that they've taken in South America that have made it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. And then again, in studies in New Mexico, not specifically with diatoms, but with green algae spores, where they've traveled over 26 miles up a mountain from the nearest lake that is known to have a quantity on hand. So these things can make their way across the country depending on different weather conditions and then on different events, like a big fire in California burning. It can get caught up in the smoke, and we know they have a lot of problems with drought out that way. We also do know that they have a lot of problems with fire in a lot of areas. So that's a legitimate concern. And then when they make it here and they find your water with different conditions that are set up for them to thrive, they can take advantage of that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to ask you, and I don't mean to interrupt things, but we've had a lot of Sahara dust. Could that be an example of what you're talking about?
Can you try the question once again?
Transporting
in a wind?
I
can't.
I kind of heard that they're asking about a specific dust storm. I think. Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Dust storm is absolutely something that can contribute. And
now I stood up. We'll get African dust.
Yes,
and it's literally dust from Africa.
Yes.
If that's what's causing some of it to be coming from there.
It can absolutely do that. And yeah, I can't say yes enough. And I'll tell you, it was always interesting to me because a lot of times you would see people from Korea and different parts of Asia walking around here in the United States with the mask on. I mean, long before the pandemic. And I never knew why. I just never did. And the military had me go out there, and I go out from time to time. I teach over at USAG Humphreys, if anybody was in the service. That's in South Korea. And when I go out there, because of that dust in Africa in the desert, the air is actually literally yellow, and everybody wears masks. And so much is coming over with that dust, including fungus, algae spores. I mean, I would have to, for me to say 100% there's diatoms in it, I'm not going to say that unless I take a sample and test it, because that's me. However, I suspect that they're in there, and it is actually absolutely feasible. So yes, you are 100% correct. That is a great question. You can just dump a ton of chlorine in there and keep the level really high for a long time. But this isn't something where we can just dump and leave. You're looking at maintaining a chlorine level of 30 parts per million or higher for the entirety of a 24-hour period of time. We know mustard algae is hard to kill. If we're going to do it with chlorine alone.
And then no one can get in the pool for like 3 days.
Unless it depends on how much you like them. You know, you pick and choose your battles here. So, all right. So that's one option. If you can find the chlorine, if. Sodium bromide, that we use, that is a product that works really, really well for this. The way sodium bromide works, when you add that to a chlorinated body of water, the chlorine oxidizes the sodium bromide, and what you get is bromine until the bromine gas is off, and then you have chlorine again. How long it takes the bromine to gas off before you have just chlorine again depends on how much chlorine you put into that pool. It's not bromine forever. It's bromine until the bromine gas is off. And you can expedite that with large amounts of chlorine. We already know it's going to cause a high chlorine demand. The major benefit in using bromine as an algaecide as compared to chlorine is the fact that bromine does not have any bond whatsoever with cyanuric acid at all. So whatever cyanuric acid does to slow the effectiveness of chlorine, bromine's not affected by that. So in that scenario, it is a better algaecide because of those reasons. It is important to understand that, and I know I have it listed here, not for use with UV, ozone, or saltwater generators. That's because sodium bromide in any of those environments, when it goes through any of those processes, can produce a disinfectant byproduct known as bromate, which is a carcinogen. That's why I don't recommend it there. I will tell you it is something that people have to drink or swallow in order to become ill. It's not something that's known to be absorbed through skin. So if you've done this in the past, I wouldn't fear that I've hurt someone, because it would take copious amounts of water, and we just don't typically drink copious amounts of water. I don't drink it at all because people put their butts in pool water.
Yeah, you should specify pool water.
Pool water. Did I not? Weren't we talking about
No.
pool water today?
Yeah, I know, but you should really be specific. Pool water. People drink a lot of water, just not a lot of pool water.
Yes, pool water. Don't drink the pool water. People put their butts in there, and there's chemicals in there and things that can hurt you. So when the chlorine oxidizes, yes.
I got a question of the bromine. If the bromine does like bromate.
Bromate?
Can I ask the question? I'm bad with words. It's been a long
Can you? You're fairly incoherent at the moment. I mean, I can't
It's
hear you.
okay. Just hold on.
Okay.
Hey, y'all. So when it goes through ozone or UV and it turns into a bromate, does the bromate stay in the pool, or does it eventually gas off the same as the bromine?
The bromate will also eventually gas off. Again, I can't tell you how long of a period of time it takes for that to occur. But the problem in those scenarios is UV, ozone, or a saltwater generator. Those are also things that are continually running. So this is not a one and done scenario. So it's constantly making new. That's the downfall there.
Blu-ray XL is the power of minerals working for you. Reduce your overall chemical costs and labor up to 50% guaranteed. Whether you have 20 accounts or 20,000, Blu-ray XL's direct pricing and free shipping to the pool trade have you covered. Improving pool professionals' profit and work-life balance is what they do. Blu-ray XL, the real mineral purifier. Visit them at BluRayXL.com.
Blu-ray all day.
All metals will cause lysis to occur. Lysis is disruption of the cell membrane. All metals except for one metal, and it works with either algae cells or bacteria cells. That causes disruption of the cell membranes, which causes the algae or the bacteria to spill its guts. There's an added benefit that copper has. It interferes with the Calvin cycle. Actually, right over here, if you see on the left-hand side where these piles of, they look like coins, but that's not what they're supposed to be. The photosystem 2, that's exactly where it starts to interfere in the electron transport when there's a copper level in the water, which can't perform photosynthesis. It can't get the carbohydrates that it needs, and then it will ultimately starve to death. The reason copper sulfate isn't as good as it could be in a swimming pool is because we can't put in enough to actually hit a fatal level for diatoms. Our maximum allowed level in pools is 1 part per million. We know even at 1 part per million, the potential for staining is high. It takes 5 parts per million in order to wipe out quickly. So what you're doing when you go with a copper algaecide in the treatment of these things is you're poisoning it. You're not killing it. You're giving it enough poison to cause a long, miserable death, but it can take quite some time. I've had pools where I've worked with this in just using that and not adding anything else to expedite, where it's taken a month to get rid of 50% of what was there because I'm using less than a lethal dose. That's part of the reason it doesn't knock it out super, super quick. Silver also causes lysis to occur. Silver then also can alter the DNA. It basically adheres to the DNA within the cell, and it causes it issues that way. Stainless steel, it's the only metal that does not cause lysis. But you remember back in the day, I mean, way back in the day, if you've ever been through an antique home or a vintage home or whatever they call them, whatever, turn of the century home, not this last century millennials, but the one before that. Doorknobs were even made of brass. Brass is 86% copper. What you had was a self-cleaning doorknob. If you had germs on your hands and you released the brass handle, that doorknob, just from the copper that it contained, would start to lyse the bacteria that was left behind. Something that you can use that can give you a super high level of metals that you can make go away relatively quickly. Andrea, any thoughts?
Oh, I was just thinking about the other day when I got copper algaecide in my eye. So I just wanted to point out, keep eye wash in your truck and be careful pouring liquid stuff into your pools. I was
Correct.
just
Always
thinking
make
about
sure,
it. Yeah.
No, you're right. It's good to point out. Always make sure your head is not under the bottle when you pour liquid stuff into pools.
It splashed back into my eye. It was so painful.
You guys still used alum in Houston, correct? Aluminum sulfate. I know we use it as a flock, but aluminum sulfate is 14% aluminum. The benefit there is if you go with a large dose of aluminum sulfate, it will flock, it will settle out, but you will be exposing whatever algae you have in that pool, whether it's the kind that sticks to the wall or the kind that dusts on the floor, to a high level of metals. Now, aluminum is not as effective at lysing as any of the metals we spoke about so far, but copper, my maximum acceptable level is 1. Silver, my maximum acceptable level is 0.1 parts per million. I can get 14 parts per million of aluminum out of 100 parts per million. It's a dose of 8.33 pounds per 10,000 gallons will give me 14 parts per million of aluminum overnight. that will flock and settle on the floor. And then when you vac it to waste, you'll also be removing the aluminum that you added, so you don't have to contend with a high metal level in that pool. That is something that will work. And aluminum sulfate, depending on where you purchase it, is also relatively inexpensive.
So
Like I said,
aluminum, so the alum flocks itself, basically.
correct.
Sweet.
Because it bonds with hydroxides that are in the water. It creates an aluminum hydroxide flock, which settles to the floor. And that's how the aluminum is removed in that flock that caught everything else on the way down. And you'll be removing phosphates at the same time. That's another benefit of alum. Super cheap product, depending on where you go. If you're buying it from your local pool store, no, it's going to cost you a fortune, right? The same thing, you could buy McCormick's brand in the spice aisle in your grocery store, but those little tiny containers, that'll add up real quick.
They sell it in feed stores and pond stores around here in Florida.
They do. Find the stuff that's earmarked for water treatment centers, because aluminum sulfate is still
Pond stores.
one of the first. What?
Pond
Okay,
stores.
Pond stores. Yes, pond stores. But you can get
Good
my
thing.
point being, you can get this stuff for like $30 for 50 pounds. That's what I pay for it. That's what they're still paying for it in this area. That's a significant savings. That's less than $1 a pound. And now all of a sudden, a dose of 8 pounds per 10,000 gallons is less than $4. That's awesome to treat mustard algae. So that's another way that you could go. Anybody know the other name for this? That's a brand name for it. You guys are familiar with it. EDTA and ammonium sulfate. I couldn't hear, but if there's a winner, Kristen said that she would hook you up with a wonderful prize. I don't know what it is. She won't even tell me what the prize is.
No, I was wondering if it was with our polar X's or something. I don't know. That's all gibberish right now reading it.
It is not just the top.
Super flop.
No, not the top sentence. The top sentence. Just the top sentence, not the gibberish sentence. I will tell you. All right, I'll give you a hint. The brand. What was the answer?
Oh, David, you said super flop, right?
Not
David said
super flop. Okay, one more. I'm going to give you one more hint, and I will throw something in to add to Kristen's prize. I will throw in 1 seat in a virtual CPO class, no charge.
Ooh.
It's not bad, unless you don't need a CPO class. All right. The product used to be and is still branded under Coral Seas, but they've been purchased by another company.
Green to clear?
What?
Green to clean?
Green to clean?
Not so close, but
That was
no.
going to be my guess, not going to lie.
Oh, yeah.
Yellow treat, it's the same thing.
Not Yellow Treat. Well, any other guesses? Yes. Yellow out.
Yellow out?
Who said yellow out? Nobody.
Someone said yellow out. I heard her.
I heard yellow out. Kristen, get me that person's information so I can send them information on hooking them up with a CPO class. This is still not a bad way to go. EDTA, that's the same stuff they use in hospitals to sanitize. It's a sanitizer. If you guys ever bought Clorox wipes from the grocery store, from wherever, you know, those pre-Clorox, there's no chlorine in those, none whatsoever. Look at the label. It's that gibberish across the top there. It uses EDTA. That's the chemical that it uses there. But the big benefit to us is it reduces smear adhesion. Smear. Yeah.
Ew.
EDTA. Here, just let me finish this paragraph, Kristen, and I will go away and I will leave you alone. I promise. EDTA reduces smear adhesion, so things, algaecides that normally stick to walls cannot. Ammonium sulfate, when you add it to water with chlorine in it, forms chloramines. Chloramines also have no attraction to cyanuric acid, which is why that works. Plus, they last in the water longer because they sanitize slower, so that way they will kill long term until they're used up.
Roger roll, Atlantis.
Houston now controlling the flight of Atlantis. The space shuttle spreads its wings one final time for the start of a sentimental journey into history.